He had heard every voice imaginable. But when she sang this aria, Simon Cowell understood that some performances aren't about entertainment, they're about miracles. The America's Got Talent Theater hummed with its familiar electricity, the kind of charged atmosphere that came from hundreds of dreams converging in one space. The judges sat in their usual positions, cameras positioned at perfect angles, audience members settling into their seats with the excited anticipation that defined live television. Simon Cowell tapped his pen against the red buzzer, his expression maintaining that trademark mixture of skepticism and attention that had become his signature over decades of judging talent. Tonight felt routine. The production schedule was running smoothly. The acts had been varied and entertaining, and the audience was responsive. Standard Tuesday evening auditions, the kind of predictable talent evaluation that had become Simon's professional rhythm. He scanned his notes, mentally calculating commercial breaks and remaining performance slots, already thinking ahead to the evening wrap-up. But in the wings, something extraordinary was preparing to unfold, something that would challenge every assumption Simon had ever made about the purpose of performance, the power of a mother's love, and the thin line between entertainment and prayer. Her name was Dr. Catherine Martinez, 38 years old, and she was wearing a simple black dress that she had chosen specifically because it was her daughter's favorite color. In her hands, she clutched a small photograph, its edges worn from months of constant handling. The picture showed a 7-year-old girl with bright brown eyes and a gap-toothed smile, frozen in a moment of pure joy that felt like a lifetime ago. The girl in the photograph was Sofia Martinez, Catherine's only child, who had been lying in a hospital bed at Children's Medical Center for exactly 734 days, 2 years, 15 days, and approximately 14 hours since the accident that had changed everything Catherine understood about time, hope, and the mathematics of maternal desperation. Sofia had been riding her bicycle in their neighborhood, wearing the pink helmet Catherine had insisted on, following all the safety rules they had practiced together. But safety rules couldn't protect against the teenager who was texting while driving, who ran the stop sign at 35 miles per hour and turned Catherine's world into a nightmare of medical terminology and impossible decisions. The doctors had used words like traumatic brain injury and indefinite coma, and prepare yourself for the possibility. But Catherine, who held a PhD in molecular biology and understood statistics better than most, had chosen to focus on different words: unprecedented recovery and medical miracles and never give up hope. For 2 years, Catherine had maintained a vigil that had cost her marriage, her career, and most of her savings. She slept in a reclining chair beside Sofia's bed, read her daughter's scientific journals and fairy tales with equal conviction, and played the same classical music that had filled their home when Sofia was learning to walk, to talk, to sing along with her mother's favorite arias. The neurologists had mentioned almost casually that familiar sounds could sometimes penetrate comatose states. Music, they said, particularly maternal voices, had been documented in cases where patients showed unexpected brain activity. It wasn't guaranteed, they cautioned. It wasn't even probable, but it was possible. Catherine had been singing to Sofia for 2 years. Every morning, every evening, and during the long afternoon hours when the hospital felt most like a prison. She sang lullabies and pop songs and the opera arias that had been her passion before motherhood had redirected all her energy towards someone else's dreams. But recently, Catherine had noticed something. During her performances of Puccini's O mio babbino caro, Sofia's heart rate monitor would show subtle changes. Nothing dramatic, nothing the medical staff considered significant. But Catherine had been watching those numbers obsessively for 734 days, and she knew her daughter's rhythms better than she knew her own. The idea had crystallized during a sleepless night when Catherine realized that her private performances in a hospital room might not be reaching Sofia's consciousness with the intensity they needed. What if she sang with the passion and projection she had once reserved for concert halls? What if she performed as if Sofia's life depended on it? What if she took their private ritual and made it public, powerful, impossible to ignore? America's Got Talent had seemed like the most unlikely venue for a medical intervention, but Catherine understood something about attention, about energy, about the way focused intention could sometimes accomplish what conventional medicine couldn't. If thousands of people were listening to her sing for Sofia, if the performance was broadcast live, if her voice could reach her daughter with all the amplification that technology and human emotion could provide, maybe, just maybe, it would be enough. The stage manager approached her in the wings. "Dr. Martinez, you're up." Catherine nodded, checking the photograph one more time, and whispering a prayer to whatever forces govern the space between hope and desperation. She had practiced this aria thousands of times in Sofia's hospital room, but singing it for an audience who had no idea they were about to become part of a mother's attempt to call her daughter home felt like stepping off a cliff into empty air. She walked onto the stage carrying 2 years of exhaustion, a medical degree that felt useless, and the kind of desperate love that transforms ordinary women into forces of nature. The audience applauded politely as Catherine reached center stage. She looked composed, professional, the kind of woman who belonged in boardrooms or university lecture halls. But there was something in her posture, a careful control that suggested someone who was holding herself together through sheer will. Simon leaned forward, his interest piqued by something he couldn't quite identify. This contestant felt different from the usual mix of aspiring singers and hopeful performers. There was weight to her presence, purpose that went beyond personal ambition. "Hello," Simon said in his crisp British accent. "What's your name?" "Dr. Catherine Martinez." Her voice was clear and strong, carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being heard in important rooms. "Doctor," Simon noted with interest. "What kind of doctor?" "Molecular biology," Catherine replied. "But I'm not here as a scientist tonight." Simon nodded. "And what brings you to our stage, Dr. Martinez?" Catherine looked down at the photograph in her hands, then directly at Simon. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of 2 years of bedside vigils. "I'm here to sing for my daughter. She's been in a coma for 2 years, and the doctors say familiar voices might reach her. I want to sing loud enough that she can hear me, wherever she is." The casual chatter in the audience died immediately. Even the production crew seemed to freeze. Simon felt something shift in his chest, recognition that this audition was about to transcend entertainment and become something entirely different. "What happened to your daughter?" one of the other judges asked gently. Catherine's composure faltered slightly. "Car accident when she was 7. She's been in a coma ever since. Her name is Sofia, and she used to sing with me. This was her favorite aria." She held up the photograph so the cameras could capture Sofia's smiling face. "The neurologists say that music, especially a mother's voice, might stimulate brain activity. For 2 years, I've been singing to her in the hospital. But tonight, I want to sing with all the power I have, with thousands of people listening, hoping that maybe the intensity will reach her." Simon had heard thousands of stories during his years as a judge. Sob stories, manipulation attempts, genuine tragedies, and everything in between. But there was something about Catherine's scientific precision, combined with her maternal desperation, that cut through every professional defense he had constructed. "You're trying to wake her up by singing on television," Simon said, not as a question but as an acknowledgement of the magnitude of what she was attempting. "I'm trying everything," Catherine said simply. "Science has taken me as far as it can. Now I'm trusting music." The statement hung in the air like a prayer. Simon found himself thinking of his own son, Eric, healthy and safe at home, and the arbitrary nature of the tragedies that reshape some families, while leaving others untouched. "What's the aria?" Simon asked. "O mio, babbino caro" from Puccini's Gianni, Catherine replied. "It's about a daughter pleading with her father to let her marry for love. Sofia always said it sounded like someone singing their heart out for something impossible." The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the theater. Catherine was about to sing a daughter's plea, while hoping her own daughter could hear her. "The hospital knows you're here?" one of the judges inquired. Catherine nodded. "They're broadcasting this live in Sofia's room. Her monitor is connected to their computer system. If there's any change in her vital signs, any brain activity, they'll call immediately. Simon felt a chill run down his spine. This wasn't just an audition. This was a woman using America's Got Talent as a medical intervention, turning a talent show into a prayer broadcast with biometric feedback from a comatose child. "Dr. Martinez," Simon said, his voice softer than usual. "I've never heard of anyone attempting anything like this before." Catherine smiled sadly. "I never thought I'd be the kind of person who would try it either, but motherhood changes your definition of possible." Simon nodded, understanding something profound about the lengths to which love can drive rational people. "Whenever you're ready," he said. Catherine closed her eyes, thought of Sofia's face on the morning of the accident, and began to sing. Her voice was extraordinary, not just technically proficient, but carrying 2 years of accumulated longing, scientific frustration, and the kind of desperate love that transforms ordinary sound into something approaching magic. The aria began softly, intimately, as if she were singing in Sofia's hospital room. "O mio babbino caro mi piace, è bello bello." The audience was immediately captured. This wasn't performance. This was a mother singing to her unconscious child with thousands of witnesses, hoping that collective attention might somehow amplify her voice across the miles to a hospital room where machines measured heartbeats and brain waves. As Catherine's voice grew stronger, more passionate, Simon found himself gripping the edge of the judge's table. He was watching a woman pour everything she had into 3 minutes of music, gambling her daughter's consciousness on the power of Puccini and maternal devotion. "Va a Ponte Vecchio, ma prima dal fioraio." Catherine's technique was flawless, but more importantly, her emotion was overwhelming. She wasn't singing for the judges or the audience. She was singing for Sofia, and everyone in the theater understood. They were witnessing the most important performance of this woman's life. Simon thought about the hospital room where this aria was being broadcast, about a 7-year-old girl who had been silent for 2 years, about medical equipment measuring responses to a mother's voice transmitted through television technology. As Catherine reached the climax of the aria, something unprecedented happened. Simon's phone, which he always kept on silent during tapings, began vibrating insistently against the judge's table. He looked at the caller ID, Children's Medical Center. Simon's heart stopped. He looked at Catherine, still singing with everything she possessed, then at his phone. The hospital was calling during the performance. Something was happening. Catherine reached the final notes of the aria, her voice soaring, with a combination of technical perfection and emotional intensity that transformed the theater into a cathedral. As the last note faded into silence, Simon's phone stopped vibrating. Catherine opened her eyes and looked directly at Simon, and in that moment, he understood that he was about to deliver news that would either fulfill or destroy the most desperate hope he had ever witnessed. Simon stood up from the judge's table, his phone in his hand, and walked toward the stage. The audience murmured in confusion, but Catherine's eyes never left his face. She knew. Somehow she knew that the call was about Sofia. "Catherine," Simon said, climbing onto the stage for the first time in the show's history. "I just received a phone call from Children's Medical Center." Catherine's legs nearly gave out. She gripped the microphone stand, preparing herself for whatever news Simon was about to deliver. "They want to speak with you immediately," Simon continued. "Sofia is showing brain activity they haven't seen in 2 years. She moved her hand during your performance. Her eyes fluttered when you hit the high notes." Catherine's scream of joy could be heard throughout the theater. She collapsed to her knees, crying harder than she had since the day of the accident. But these were tears of gratitude, of vindication, of a mother's intuition proved scientifically correct. Simon knelt beside her on the stage, this powerful judge undone by witnessing what might have been an actual miracle broadcast live on television. "She heard you," he said simply. "She heard you, and she's coming back." The audience erupted, but it wasn't applause for entertainment. It was celebration of something that transcended show business and touched the fundamental human experience of love, calling to love, across impossible distances. Catherine could barely speak through her tears. "I have to get to the hospital. I have to get to Sofia." "We're arranging transportation right now," Simon said. But Catherine, before you go, I want you to know something. What just happened here wasn't just a performance. It was proof that love is the most powerful force in the universe. As the golden buzzer was pressed and confetti fell around them, Catherine was already being escorted toward a car that would take her to Sofia's bedside, where her daughter's eyes were open for the first time in 734 days. The episode, when it aired 3 weeks later, became the most watched moment in television history, not because of the entertainment value, but because millions of people had witnessed something that challenged every assumption about the limitations of human connection. Sofia's recovery was gradual but complete. She had to relearn basic motor skills, speech patterns, and cognitive functions that had been dormant for 2 years. But her first word, spoken 3 hours after Catherine's performance, was "Mommy," and her first request was to hear her mother sing the aria that had called her home. Catherine never returned to her career in molecular biology. Instead, she established the Sofia Foundation, researching the intersection of music therapy and comatose patient care. Her work led to protocols that are now standard in pediatric intensive care units worldwide, protocols that acknowledge the power of familiar voices to reach consciousness in ways that medical science is still working to understand. Simon was forever changed by what he had witnessed. He began incorporating Catherine's lesson into his understanding of what talent really means, not just technical ability, but the courage to use your voice for purposes larger than yourself. The photograph of Sofia that Catherine had carried onto the stage was eventually replaced by hundreds of pictures documenting her daughter's recovery, her return to school, her own musical education, and her decision to become a pediatric neurologist herself. But Catherine kept that original photograph in her office at the Sofia Foundation, a reminder of the moment when a mother's aria became a medical intervention, when entertainment became prayer, and when the power of love proved stronger than the silence of an unconscious mind. Sofia, now 10 years old and fully recovered, still requests that her mother sing "O mio babbino caro" every night before bed, not because she needs it to wake up anymore, but because she remembers, somewhere in her consciousness, the sound of her mother's voice calling her home from the darkest place she had ever been. And Catherine sings it every night, not as a desperate plea anymore, but as a lullaby of gratitude, a celebration of the miraculous ordinary, and a reminder that sometimes the most powerful medicine comes not from laboratories, but from the infinite capacity of a mother's heart to refuse surrender. The aria that had once been about a daughter pleading for love became a mother's proof that love never stops calling, never stops believing, and never accepts silence as a final answer. Some voices, when they carry enough love, can wake the dead. On that Tuesday night at America's Got Talent, Catherine Martinez's voice proved that some performances aren't about winning competitions. They're about calling children home. It wasn't just television that night. It was a mother's aria broadcast across the space, between consciousness and coma, between science and faith, between the limits of medicine and the unlimited power of a voice that refuses to let love end in silence. In the months that followed, the medical community struggled to explain what had happened in Sofia's hospital room during Catherine's performance. Dr. James Richardson, the neurologist who had been treating Sofia since the accident, published a paper titled "Auditory Stimulation and Consciousness Recovery: The Martinez Case" in the Journal of Pediatric Neurology. "In my 30 years of practice," Dr. Richardson wrote, "I've never witnessed such a dramatic response to musical stimulation. Sofia's brain activity during her mother's televised performance showed patterns we typically associate with natural awakening from sleep, not emergence from traumatic coma. The data was undeniable. Sofia's heart rate had accelerated during specific melodic phrases. Her brainwaves had shown increased activity during the aria's emotional climax. Most remarkably, her hand movement had occurred at the exact moment Catherine hit the high note, as if she were reaching toward a voice that had been calling to her for 2 years. For Catherine, the scientific validation was secondary to the simple miracle of sitting beside Sofia's bed and watching her daughter's eyes track movement, hearing her whisper requests for water, witnessing the slow return of the personality that had been locked away for 734 days. The reunion had been overwhelming. Catherine had arrived at the hospital to find Sofia awake but confused, trying to process 2 years of lost time. Her first words beyond "mommy" had been a question. Did I miss my piano lesson? Sofia had been taking beginner piano lessons before the accident, practicing the simple melodies that would eventually lead to the classical pieces Catherine loved. The fact that music was her first concern upon awakening seemed like cosmic confirmation that Catherine's intuition about the power of familiar sounds had been correct. The recovery process was neither quick nor simple. Sofia had to rebuild motor skills, relearn basic mathematics, and reconnect with a world that had continued evolving during her absence. But throughout every challenge, music remained Sofia's strongest bridge back to full consciousness. Catherine became an unofficial consultant on music therapy protocols. Other families dealing with comatose children began requesting her guidance, and Catherine found herself translating her experience into practical applications for parents who were navigating their own vigils. I learned that singing to Sofia wasn't just about the remote possibility of waking her up, Catherine would tell these families. It was about maintaining my connection to hope, about refusing to let despair become my primary relationship with my daughter. Simon Cowell had stayed in touch with Catherine and Sofia throughout the recovery process. He visited them at the hospital several times, bringing books for Sofia and coffee for Catherine. But more importantly, he brought recognition that what had happened on his stage had changed him fundamentally. Before that night, Simon confided during one hospital visit, I thought my job was to find marketable talent. But Catherine showed me that the most important performances aren't about commercial success. They're about love finding a way to express itself when everything else has failed. Simon established a fund at Children's Medical Center, specifically for music therapy programs serving comatose and brain-injured children. The Catherine Martinez Fund provided instruments, sound equipment, and trained music therapists for families who wanted to explore auditory stimulation as part of their loved one's treatment protocol. Sofia's return to school became a carefully managed transition. Her teachers noted that her experience had given her an unusual capacity for empathy, particularly with other children facing medical challenges. Sofia seems to understand suffering in a way that's remarkable for her age. Her third-grade teacher observed, when another student was hospitalized, Sofia was the first to suggest we record bedtime stories to send to her. She said hospitals are scary when they're too quiet. Catherine had shifted her research focus entirely. Instead of molecular biology, she was now studying the intersection of neuroscience and music therapy, working to understand how auditory processing functions in compromised neurological states. Her first published paper, post-recovery, established guidelines for family members who wanted to incorporate music into their loved one's recovery process. The Martinez Protocol, as it came to be known in medical literature, documented statistically significant improvements in coma patients who received structured musical stimulation. I remember the singing, Sofia told a documentary filmmaker. I couldn't move or talk, but I could hear mommy, and I knew she was trying to help me come back. The aria was the loudest, the most beautiful, and when she sang it on the big stage, I knew it was time to wake up, because so many people were listening with her. Catherine still performed O mio babbino caro regularly, but now it was at medical conferences and fundraising events. Each performance was dedicated to families currently maintaining vigils for unconscious loved ones, and Catherine would always end by saying, "Keep singing. They can hear you, even when science can't prove it yet." The photograph that Catherine had carried onto the AGT stage remained framed in Sofia's bedroom, now surrounded by pictures documenting her recovery. First steps after 2 years of immobility, first words after prolonged silence, first day back at school. Sofia had chosen to learn O mio babbino caro as her advanced piano piece, and during her first public performance of it, Catherine sat in the audience crying tears of gratitude rather than desperation. The aria that had once been a mother's desperate plea had become a daughter's celebration of return. The Children's Medical Center installed a plaque in the wing, where Sofia had spent 2 years in a coma. It read, "In honor of all families who refuse to stop believing, who sing to silence, and who prove that love is the most powerful medicine we possess. Dedicated to Catherine and Sofia Martinez, and to the voices that call children home." Simon Cowell attended the dedication ceremony, and in his brief remarks, he said something that became the hospital's unofficial motto: "Some performances change entertainment, others change lives. The rarest performances do both." Catherine Martinez reminded us that when love finds its voice, miracles stop being impossible and become inevitable. On that Tuesday night at America's Got Talent, what mattered was simpler and more immediate. A mother's voice had crossed the space between stage and hospital room, between consciousness and coma, between hope and despair, and had proven that some loves are so powerful, they can wake the dead. Catherine Martinez had walked onto that stage carrying a photograph and a prayer. She left carrying the knowledge that maternal love, when it finds its perfect expression, can accomplish things that science is still working to understand. The aria ended, the applause faded, the cameras stopped rolling. But somewhere in a hospital room, a little girl opened her eyes and asked for her mother, and the real performance, the long, slow, beautiful song of recovery, finally began.